Hello, good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Melissa Burke. I'm one of the school counselors here at the high school. We have Carrie Temkin, who is here from the UW-Madison's Office of Financial Aid. And we thank her for coming out, and thank you for coming out on this, again, rainy night, so we appreciate that. We'll have the presentation, and then following the presentation, we'll have some time to answer questions. So if you have questions, just make sure you sit hopefully towards the front a little bit, but usually we'll have plenty of time to answer questions. And we'll stick around a little bit afterwards if you have a question that's a little bit more personal that you want to ask individually as well. So with that being said, I will hand the reins over to Carrie Temkin. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Like Melissa said, my name is Carrie Temkin. I'm the outreach coordinator in the Office of Student Financial Aid at UW-Madison. And just to get started, I want to make it clear that I am wearing the UW crest, and some of the handouts are UW related. But the majority of what I'll be talking about tonight as it relates to financial aid is applicable no matter what institution we're talking about. Community colleges, tech schools, four-year, in-state, out-of-state, public, private. I will talk about 3 of our access programs that we're really excited about, but I'll let you know if there's anything that I'm sharing that's UW specific. So in the Office of Student Financial Aid, we certainly focus on the students who are already in our office, but also as a flagship institution for our state, we see it as our responsibility to get out and about and share information about accessing higher education. So I'm really grateful to be with you tonight, and kudos to you for being here, because you're poising yourself and your students for success. Because how many of you, this is your first time doing the whole admissions, college, financial aid thing? Look around. So I want to name that this whole process isn't something that we just, are born with knowing and being able to navigate and know exactly what forms we have to fill out and when the deadlines are and how each institution does it. But know that you're not alone, and you are among a community of folks who are going through the same thing, and there are a lot of resources out there for you as well. And I want to name also that if you have questions along the way of your process of filling out the FAFSA or anything financial aid related, even if you have no intention of going to UW-Madison, please know that you can still call our office, and we'll be happy to support you and walk you through any of that process. So, to get started, well, actually, before I hop in, it's important for you to know that there's going to be a quiz at the end. You laugh, but I'm serious. So you really need to pay attention, not just for, knowledge, but there are prizes. So you've been warned, right? So when it comes to financial aid, the very first thing that you have to know about and fill out is the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. Financial aid doesn't really exist without filling out the FAFSA. Most of what I'm going to talk about is just FAFSA related, but know that some private schools, particularly East Coast private schools, so if that's on your radar, they also require something called the CSS profile, which is a lot more, I would say, in-depth than the FAFSA. So know that if you're looking at schools on the East Coast or private schools, you may have to do a CSS profile in addition to a FAFSA. But we're just going to talk about the FAFSA tonight. So the free application for federal student aid, I want to point out that it's free. So if you somehow come to a website that's asking you for money, you're being bamboozled, try again. It's just FAFSA.gov, pretty easy to find. And when you fill out the FAFSA, you will need parental information. There are some unique situations that don't require parental information. I'll talk about that in a little while. Just expect that you likely will have to provide parental information. I'm a first-generation college student. I went to UW-Madison a while back, like a medium while back, not too long ago. And my dad refused to give me his taxes. He was so upset. He's like, "Why does the government need my information? You're the one going to school. You're the one paying for it." He was just out of his mind upset about it. And I don't think he understood that without his parental information, I would not have gotten access to grants, scholarships, or student loans. And without those things, I would not have gone to school, and I certainly wouldn't be here talking to you about how to get financial aid, right? I know he wasn't like trying to be malicious, it was just something that he didn't understand or know about. So I just want to acknowledge that name that it may not be something that's super intuitive. Even if your students are supporting themselves through college, we still need parental information. The cool thing about the FAFSA, there are some cool things. I think it has a bad rap overall, but I hope that you leave today feeling a little bit more confident in getting ready to fill it out. But the one cool thing about the FAFSA is that as opposed to some scholarship as opposed to some college admissions applications where you may have to fill out multiple, you only have to fill out the FAFSA once the first year that you're going into school, and you put multiple school codes on that FAFSA. So every school, every individual institution has its own unique school code. So there will be a point in the FAFSA where it asks you, which schools do you want your FAFSA information sent to? I highly recommend that you look into the school's website themselves and double check what that code is, because oftentimes if a student has gotten accepted to a university and months go by and they've never gotten their financial aid offer, they'll call the office and say, hey, I don't know what my financial aid offer is, and it's because our institution never received their FAFSA because they typed in the school code wrong. So I really highly recommend that you double and triple check the school code to make sure that every institution that you want the FAFSA, that you want to have your financial information, the FAFSA, you send it to. Something to note, though, about the FAFSA, it is not a one-and-done type of relationship. It is ongoing. You fill it out every single year that you intend to be in school. So note that. The good news, though, is next year it'll auto-populate a lot of the stuff that you put in this year, so it'll be a little easier. There also is, surprise, surprise, a smartphone app for filling out the FAFSA, if that's something that you're interested in. FSA, the Federal Student Aid, is putting a lot of resources into this application to make sure that it has user-friendly features. So it does have some features on it that the website does not have, and it makes it easier to identify whether or not it's asking for student information or parent information. So if that's something that you're interested in checking out, I recommend it. It's completely secure, and you can start on the app and finish on the website and vice versa. So it can be completed online at FAFSA.gov. I already referenced that. When you sit down and fill out the FAFSA, you'll answer every question based on what is happening in your world today. So when it asks for your assets or what's in your checking account, you answer it based on what is in your checking account the day that you're filling it out. However, when it's asking for tax information, it's asking about prior year. So for those of you who are seniors, you'll be entering college in 2020, so you'll need 2018 tax information. So tonight when you go home and you start your FAFSA, because you're so excited to do it, you'll be using 2018 tax information. It does become available yesterday, so that's cool. That's why you can go home tonight and start filling it out. But it becomes available October 1st every single year. So you can just put a recurring event on your calendar right now. I won't be upset if you pull out your phone and put that in right now. Often schools do have a priority deadline for filling out the FAFSA. UW-Madison's happens to be December 1st. Every institution would have a different priority deadline, and you'll really want to make sure to fill out the FAFSA before those priority deadlines, and really the sooner the better in order to make sure that you have access to all the aid that you are eligible for. So what do you need? Again, the student and the parent. First of all, this looks like a lot of stuff, so let's just breathe a little bit, right? Generally, you have all of this information anyway, but it's really helpful to gather all of this information before you sit down to fill out the FAFSA. So you'll need your 2018, and this, when I say 2018, again, I'm talking to the seniors out there. For your junior, next year when you fill it out, you'll need 2019 tax information. But for the seniors, you'll need 2018 federal tax returns and W-2s for the student and the parent, 2018 untaxed income records, including child support or veterans' non-education benefits, any information on your savings, investments, business assets, and farm assets, if applicable. So about business assets and farm assets, you do not need to include a small business that has less than 100 employees, and you do not need to include a farm that has less than 100 employees, or if you live on that farm. You need your driver's license, social security number. If you don't have a social security number, then an alien registration card or permanent resident card. The date of birth of the parents, and if applicable, the month and year of parents' marriage, divorce, or separation. So, some frequently asked questions and tips and tricks for when you are filling out the FAFSA. A question that we get asked frequently is, okay, what if we are from a divorced family? My parents are divorced. Which parent do I use on the FAFSA? And the answer is you do only use one parent, but you use the parent who you live with the most. If you have, everything is split down the middle and you are living 50% with your mom, 50% with your dad, then you look at who supports the student the most financially. And if all of that is exactly 50-50 down the middle, then one way to tip the scale is, well, there's 365 days in a year generally, unless there's a leap year, and you can't split that in half. So it can get down to that sort of nitty-gritty, but then you just use that one parent as the custodial parent. It has nothing to do with who claims the student on their taxes. And generally speaking, when you choose one parent to use on the FAFSA, you stick with that parent the entire time that the students are in school, as opposed to who you claim on taxes. You can flip-flop that every year. So moving on, I mentioned earlier, what if the student is paying for everything themselves? Do I still have to include parental information? Yes, except in situations where the student is over the age of 24, if the student's married, if they were orphaned before the age of 13, if they're a veteran or in active duty, or homeless and endangered youth. So those are some circumstances where they would be independent and don't have to provide parental information. It's important also to know that if your financial circumstances change, either based on now when you're filling out the FAFSA and your tax information from 2018 is no longer representative of your financial circumstances, or if your financial circumstances have changed between when you fill out the FAFSA, so tonight, and next September when your student starts school, know that there is always an appeal process at any institution. The appeal process will look different depending on where you go, but you can always tell them about your special circumstance, and then they'll ask for different documentation and different paperwork and see if there's a different type of financial aid offer that you can get based on that. I'm gonna knock on wood and hope that none of you have to do that, because generally they're big, bad life events that would require this, like a death in the family, a divorce, a loss of income, loss of job, things like that. But know that that is always an avenue that you can take. While you're filling out the FAFSA, when it comes to the tax portion, there will be an option to use the IRS data retrieval tool. I highly recommend you try using this. It basically, you're giving permission for the FAFSA to suck out your information from the IRS and spit it right into the FAFSA. This means that there's less stuff for you to fill out, which means that there's less room for human error. It's just easier, right? And 1/3 of all FAFSAs are flagged for verification, meaning that, and you'll get notified of this after you finish filling out the FAFSA if you are flagged. It just means that you have to provide additional documentation to prove what you put on the FAFSA is correct. Also note, though, that there are some institutions that require everyone to do additional verification as well. So do note that and pay attention to your email. I'm talking to you students out there. So if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, you are less likely to be flagged for verification from the federal government. Something to note, though, it's a little touchy, it's a little tricky, and it's really important that you use the same exact information that's on your W-2s or your tax information when you're requesting to use the tool. And by that, I mean, if your address says street, S-T-R-E-E-T, and you type in S-T dot, it won't work. So you have to type in everything exactly how it is on your taxes. If you have multiple last names or something like that, fill it in exactly how it is on your taxes. Okay, here's the thing about the FAFSA. It's a federal website, and hundreds of thousands of students and families are accessing it at the same time across the country. So sometimes it's a little glitchy, right? It gets a little tired, it's a little overworked, particularly like yesterday and today. So I want to name that for a few reasons. One, if you're getting frustrated and something isn't working, it likely is not you. And two, to encourage you to plan ahead and make sure that you're not filling out the FAFSA the day before your dream school's priority deadline, because if something happens that's completely out of your control, your dream school probably won't care, right? So you want to plan ahead and make sure to do the FAFSA as early as possible. I also want to name that plenty of people fill out the FAFSA in one sitting and it's done and it's fine. But if you are having issues, know that you can come back to it later. I have found that there's a chat function to talk directly to people who work in the FAFSA location, I don't know, who work for FAFSA. And if you go to contact us on the FAFSA website, you can click the chat function. I've used it several times. They're really responsive, have great advice. So if there's a question that you're not quite sure how to answer, that'd be a great tool to use to get clarification on any of that. Or if you think that something's happening and the website is glitchy, you can always reach out to the chat function and say, this is my experience, what's going on, and they may just let you know, oh yeah, it's something that we're working on, check back tomorrow. If parents do not have a social security number, you can just type in all zeros. So that's something to know. If that is the circumstance, know that you will be flagged for verification and you'll have to provide some of the documents around earnings. And then in order to even start filling out the FAFSA and in order to sign and submit the FAFSA, you need an FSA ID. This is something that you could get yesterday or the day before today. And you'll need an email address or a phone number and password to fill it out. If you are someone who changes phone numbers a lot, don't use your phone number. And for students out there, do not use your school email address to create your FSA ID, because next year, when you need to log in again, that email address will no longer be valid, right? So use your Gmail account or whatever you have to create that FSA ID. Also, this is going to be with you all 4 years, 5 years, 27 years that you'll be in school. Just kidding, about the 27 part. So hold on to that, save it somewhere, and both the student and the parent needs a unique FSA ID. There's a really great resource out there to help you fill out the FAFSA. It's called College Goal Wisconsin. It's a nonprofit that provides statewide support where they go to different locations across the state, different schools, libraries, things like that, and bring in financial aid administrators to help students and families sit down, fill out the FAFSA, and if you have any questions, there are experts there to help answer those questions for you. And there's also a scholarship drawing as well. There are several upcoming in the Madison area. There's one at La Follette tonight. There's one at East soon, but really there's several. So I encourage you to check out those dates and locations and attend. So after you file the FAFSA, after you hit submit, your results are sent electronically first to the federal government, and the federal government double checks some things, like make sure that your name matches your social security number, same for you and your parents. If you're a male, it goes to selective service to make sure that if you're over the age of 18, you've registered for selective service. And then after all of that checks out, it gets electronically sent to all of the schools that you put in the school code for. Please note, though, that schools don't do anything with those FAFSAs until someone is admitted. They don't want to do a bunch of paperwork for students who may not get admitted eventually, right? After you submit it, both the student and the parent will get the results of your FAFSA. It's called the Student Aid Report, either in email or post form, depending on what you choose. And that's when you'll learn your expected family contribution, and I'll talk more about that in depth in a bit. I already talked about some students may have to verify. This would be the time in the process where you would contact a university with any special circumstances if that's the case. And then after the student is admitted to the college, this depends on which institution you're admitted to, but some institutions give the financial aid offer immediately along with admissions decision. Some universities take a few days, some universities take a few weeks, but know that it should come, and if it doesn't, you should reach out to the financial aid office and say, hey, I haven't gotten this, what's going on? Because no one wants you to make a decision about where to go to school without knowing the financial implications of that decision. So the FAFSA, what does it even do? Why do we fill it out? This is exactly what I think happens with the FAFSA, and I think that this is what the FAFSA machine looks like. I think it lives in some sort of like cloud somewhere. So essentially, it takes in your information, it does its little calculation that's very complex. Look at all of those little gadgets and gadgets in there, right? Very complex. And it spits out the magic number, your expected family contribution. And this is the number that your financial aid package is based on. Everything that you put in your FAFSA is part of that complex calculation. However, the main determinants of the EFC, the expected family contribution, is income and assets of both the student and parents, family size, the number of people in college, not including parents, and the age of the older parent. So the older parent is, the closer retirement you are, the more protected your assets are. I want to name that the expected family contribution is not necessarily a number that is based in reality of what students and families can provide for your students' college education, okay? It's not a perfect or even ideal process. For instance, it doesn't take into account cost of living. So someone in Brooklyn, New York, could have the same exact everything that they put in the FAFSA as someone in Brooklyn, Wisconsin, and they would have the same expected family contribution, even though it costs a heck of a lot more to live in Brooklyn, New York, for instance. So it is based on a formula established by the law, and it really boils down to the lower income, the more expenses, the greater financial need you have. I already talked about some of the things that are looked at as it relates to income. I want to point out, though, that the home that you live in is not included as an asset, but if you have multiple homes, the other homes are. If you have real estate, that is included. Your retirement investments are not included as assets on the FAFSA, but other investments are included. So we wouldn't even be having this conversation at all if there was no cost associated with college, but guess what? There is. So I think it's important for us to have a conversation about what are we actually talking about here? One, because these will be words that show up in your financial aid offers, and it's important that you know how to read those. But also there are things thrown around like, oh, they got a full ride scholarship. Well, what does that mean exactly? Is that just tuition, or is that full cost of attendance? So every university is required to post their cost of attendance. That's a federal regulation. There's tuition and fees included. That's a number that would be set in stone. Then there's room and board. This is another number that would be kind of set in stone and likely billed directly, especially if you are living in the residence halls. There's probably some wiggle room if you're talking about residence halls. There might be some res halls that are more expensive, res halls that are older and cheaper. There may be a range in meal plans that you can choose. So generally, there is a little wiggle room with room and board of what that cost will be, but it is likely something that will be billed directly to you. The rest of what's listed in the cost of attendance are just averages of averages, and there's a lot of way to save money in those spaces. So the total cost of attendance really is sort of a worst-case scenario of what you may have to pay, but very few people actually end up spending that much. Transportation, for instance. At UW-Madison, For an in-state student, transportation is budgeted at $824. I don't know if your student will be taking a rocket ship from campus to home, but I would be shocked if they spent $824 in the year to get back and forth from home, right? So that's an example of where you're not going to be spending that much money. Another thing is books and supplies. A lot of this depends on, like if you're an art student and you have a ton of supplies, they'll be spending a little bit more than a biology student who just has textbooks their first year, right? Also, a lot of students rent books on Amazon these days and save a lot of money doing that. And then lastly is miscellaneous living expenses. This is where, when I was walking in back there, somebody said, get used to eating ramen. This is what your life is going to be, right? So that's the question of miscellaneous living expenses. If you're not eating in the dorms, are you going to be eating lobster or ramen? Are you going out to the movies every night? Are you, there are a lot of choices that you can make as it relates to miscellaneous living expenses. How often are you buying a whole new wardrobe? And really, my whole point in this is I hope that you utilize the cost of attendance breakdown as a way to start a conversation around budget between you and your student. And I really encourage you and your student to talk now about expectations of who is expected to cover what. It's really awful when I hear from students who come into my office and say, oh, I thought that my parents were going to pay for X, Y, and Z. Turns out they're not, and now I don't know what to do. I didn't, whatever. Like, I try to hold in my thoughts a little bit, right? But it happens. So I really encourage you to have those conversations. I know that talking about money, especially in the Midwest, is something that is a little taboo. I think that goes back to why my dad was like, I don't want to give you my taxes. And this is part of that process. So please start those conversations now. So I did plug in the costs for this upcoming school year of the 3 schools that are here in town, which show a range, right? The private school, public school, and community college. And we will be hearing a little bit from Madison College in a bit too. So what I want to point out here is that the costs differ, but your expected family contribution would stay the same. So when you fill out the FAFSA and you get your EFC, that EFC stays the same no matter where you apply. So let's pretend that you have an EFC of $9,319. That means that your need is variable by the school cost. You'll have a higher need if you go to Edgewood than if you go to Madison College. For our visual learners out there, that's what that looks like. So hold on to that, the word need, determined need, because that comes up in the financial aid world often. So what is financial aid then, right? I think a lot of folks think of financial aid as just the free stuff, grants and scholarships. Obviously, that's the free kind of money, the best kind of money, the money you don't have to pay back. However, when it comes to financial aid and the financial aid offers that you'll be getting, it includes things like scholarships and grants, but it also includes loans, or what we call self-help aid, and also other self-help aid as employment opportunities. So a little soapbox. No, I'll wait a couple slides to get on my soapbox about loans. Something about employment, though. We hear from a lot of, mainly parents, saying, I don't want my student to get a job their freshman year. I want them to take the time to get acclimated to the rigor of their classes, to just figure out life in this whole new world, to make friends, all of that stuff. And I get that. That's completely legit. And I think it's important for you to know that there is a ton of research out there that shows that students who have an on-campus job their freshman year do better academically and are more likely to graduate than their peers who do not. Any guesses on why that is? I hear whispers. You have to talk louder. Huh? Time management, absolutely. This will be the first time in your student's life that they don't have every single minute planned for them. And also there will be days that you only have 2 classes. So there's big gaps of time in the middle of your day that make it so easy to watch the next episode of whatever, right? Or keep playing that video game. But if you have a few hours of your job plopped in the middle, it's a little bit harder to do that. So time management is big. Also, community and belonging, meeting people that are different from you that you wouldn't necessarily meet on your dorm floor or in your classes. Hey, that paycheck every other week is nice too. So shout out for student employment. So when it comes to financial aid, where is this money coming from? There are three sources generally. The first is the Department of Education, so there's federal dollars. The federal dollars are things that aren't going to change institution to institution. And then there's state aid, there's grants through the state, some scholarships, fellowships, things like that. Again, that would be state by state, so it depends on which state your student chooses to go to school in. And then there's institutional funding. Schools and colleges have their own bucket of money to give to financial aid. This is the piece in your financial aid offers that's going to be drastically different depending on which school you go to. There are private schools out there that will pay for your total need, so total cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution. That exists. They have big pots of money, lots of resources to be able to recruit you to their school. Public schools don't have quite as much. Community colleges don't have quite as much either. So when you're looking at cost of attendance and you're looking at your financial aid offer, it's really important that you're not just comparing what you owe, or excuse me, what money you're getting, but also looking at what you're going to end up owing at the end of the day, and taking the time to really discern that as you are comparing and contrasting your financial aid offers. So the first type of aid, gift aid. This is that best kind of money, free kind of money, right? So grants and scholarships, this is money that does not have to be paid back. The federal grants include the Pell Grant and the SEOG grant. I mentioned there's state grants, institutional grants, and also private scholarships. A pro tip for UW-Madison, if you are choosing to apply, do not wait until you are accepted to fill out institutional scholarships, because if you wait until you're accepted, the deadlines have all passed. Not ideal, something that we're working on. So once you apply, then you fill out the scholarship forms before you even know if you're accepted. So for those of you who know that you're not going to be applying to UW-Madison, that's a question that you should be asking the institutions that you're interested in. How does merit-based aid work? Is it included in my financial aid offer? At UW-Madison, merit-based is something completely separate. Everything in your financial aid offer is just based on financial need that we discern from the FAFSA. Other institutions include merit-based aid, so those are questions to ask now. When it comes to scholarships, there are some tips. Again, going back to the FAFSA, right, it's important to plan ahead. It's also important to plan ahead about filling out scholarships. Students, seniors in high school, are still students first, right? It's really important that they continue with the rigor of their academics, because admissions offices certainly care about that and look at that, of what you're doing your senior year of high school. So you have a lot going on there. Often students are in sports or student organizations or jobs or family obligations, so there's a lot going on in your world, and it can be a little overwhelming and time-consuming when you're looking at all of the options for scholarships. So it's important that you plan ahead and make specific time for you to sit down and fill out those essays and take time to fill out those applications, because doing that is the investment of your time now may turn into money saved later. So I think it's important to look at that like that. Also, I know it's uncomfortable, but this is the time to get used to other people reading your writing. Other people should be reading your college application essays. Other people should be reading your scholarship essays as well. And it's important to get that feedback and to do a first draft, second draft, third draft until it's ready to be submitted. Also, if you get an email that says, "Hey, you've been selected for this scholarship that you have never heard of," it's probably a scam. don't get scammed. And unfortunately, there's a lot of websites out there that are scholarship-based websites that say, if you pay us this amount of money, we will tell you all of the scholarships that you're eligible for. Generally, you shouldn't have to pay for free money. There are plenty of platforms out there that help make scholarship searches simpler. And there's national sites that are sort of vetted and trusted, and they're up there. So now's the portion where I'm going to talk about things just specific to UW-Madison, the next 3 slides. The first is Bucky's Tuition Promise. This is something that was launched a couple years ago that we're really proud of. We are promising every family in the state of Wisconsin, if you get into UW-Madison and you have an adjusted gross income of $58,000 or less, and this is the family adjusted gross income, so students and parents together, of $58,000 or less, we promise you 4 years tuition and fees covered. Or if you're transferring in 2 years, tuition and fees covered as well. There's no additional application for this. It would be included in your financial aid offer, and it's based on what you fill out in your FAFSA. So as I'm talking about these promise programs, again, if you're not interested in UW-Madison, a question that you should have for the institutions that you are interested in are, what sort of financial aid programs do you have that I may be eligible for? Next up is Badger Promise. We want to acknowledge that there's a lot of pathways to get to the final destination of UW-Madison if that is your plan. And so for our Wisconsin residents who are first-generation college students, what do I mean when I say first-generation college students? Yeah. Say that again. To graduate or go to college? Okay, she said first generation of their family to go or graduate college. You're mostly right. So if you have a parent who has an associate's degree, doesn't matter. If you have a parent who is 1 class away from having their 4-year degree, doesn't matter. If you have an older brother or sister who has a 4-year degree, doesn't matter. You are a first generation college student if you do not have a parent who has a 4-year degree. So for our first generation college students, transferring into UW-Madison from many of our 2-year schools or the liberal arts associate degree programs that are listed up there, and if you are Pell Grant eligible, so financial need, we promise you those last 2 years tuition and fees covered. If there's no financial need, we promise 1 year tuition and fees covered. And again, no additional application for any of this. And lastly, our best financial aid package that we have to offer for our in-state students is, and these are for incoming freshmen, so directly out of high school, traditional college students. If you are or your family is a public assistance recipient, we promise 4 years or 8 consecutive semesters of full financial need covered. So again, remember the need is cost of attendance, so that includes housing, tuition, books, food, minus your expected family contribution. So the Fast Track program covers all of that. When I say public assistance recipient, and again, this would be a question on FAFSA, WIC, SNAP, or food share, free and reduced lunch counts as that as well, Medicaid. All right, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi? No? Maybe? Hi? My name's Dulce Donnell. I'm going to jump in really quickly for 1 slide for this presentation. I will be around afterwards in case anyone has any questions. But I just really wanted to touch on Scholars of Promise, which is a program, a scholarship program at Madison College that works very closely with UW-Madison's other programs that we were looking there. So Scholars of Promise is a program at Madison College that essentially makes sure that students who qualify for the program do not pay tuition at Madison College. So for our students who want to start out with us, transfer to UW-Madison, it's a great option, and if you qualify for both programs, essentially you can do your bachelor's degree tuition free. So to qualify for Scholars of Promise, we're going to need a couple of things. You have to be a student at a Madison College District High School, which we're at Monona Grove, so you're good, don't worry. The application needs to all be in by April 1st. In fact, our Scholars of Promise application actually opened up yesterday, so perfect timing. we're going to need a couple of things. You're going to need to submit a Madison College application. We're going to have your FAFSA on file, so the sooner you file that, the better. We're going to need your ACT or AccuPlacer scores, and you're going to need a transcript showing that you have at least a 2.25 GPA. If you do all of that, have it in by April 1st, you will qualify for our Scholars of Promise program, which one is financial, which is great, again, no tuition, but also has different services like a special advisor, mentor groups, additional support that really help students when they're coming in their first year with that transition from high school to college. So if you're interested in applying for Scholars of Promise, I'm actually at Monona Grove High School pretty often. I'm the rep here, so I work with students and do free applications. You can ask the amazing counseling staff here when I'll be here next, and we can work with your student to make sure that they get all their applications in. Now, does anyone have any questions right off the bat? Yes, go ahead. Yes, this is income-based. So the most important part in here is submitting your FAFSA, and there has to be a certain estimated family contribution threshold that needs to be met for the student to qualify. Any other questions? I'm in another room over by the library, but I'll be bopping around if anybody has any questions. So I'll hand it back over. Yeah.
All right. All right, getting back to the other types of financial aid, getting to that self-help aid. So loans. Something I want to say about loans. Well, first of all, before I get started, what are some things that come to your mind when you hear the word loan? Yeah? Home loan? Okay, what else? I heard interest. What else? Debt. That word even just like hurts a little bit, right? Debt. It's like a gross word to say it. Yeah. And there's a national conversation certainly around the student loan debt crisis. And it's a real thing, and a lot of institutions are trying their best in a lot of different ways to lower that debt burden. But for a lot of families out there, there's a choice of either going to college or, a choice of not going to college or taking out some student loans. And student loans, I need to point out, are very different than any kind of other debt that you can accrue in your life. What happens to a car the moment you drive it off the lot? It depreciates, right? You can get your car repossessed, you can get a lien against your house. Interest rates on credit cards are through the roof. The same thing is not applicable to student loans. So I just want to name that, and it's important that you are a savvy consumer of those loans that you're taking out. But if that's your choice of not going to college or taking out some loans, it's not the end of the world. And the more informed you are, the easier it is to navigate that process once you're out of school. So I think it's important to name that. So loans, yes, must have to be repaid with interest. There are several kinds of loans. The first is the Federal Direct Loan Program. These are the federal loans that everybody gets as part of their financial aid offer, no matter their financial need. Even Bill Gates' kids will get federal loans. They're probably older than college age right now. I should probably choose a different rich person. They get access to federal loans, and I'll talk a little bit more about the numbers around that in a bit. Then there's also another federal loan program specifically for parents that's called the Parent Plus Loan. This is a loan that's taken out under the parent's name, can never be transferred to the student, but is taken out on behalf of the student. Some institutions provide institutional loans, and then lastly, there's private loans. And then in addition to the self-help aid, there's employment. I already talked a little bit about that, but some of you, based on expected family contribution, might see federal work study as part of your financial aid offer. Work study is something very different than any of the other aid that you'll get because it doesn't go directly to tuition or to housing. It's rather money that you can earn as a student employee on campus. So some institutions do it differently though. Some institutions, there's specific jobs that are for work study eligible students. Some institutions, any on-campus job are for work study students. So The difference between any other job, though, is on the side of the employer, because the federal government pays for half of their wages up to what they've been offered. So employers are incentivized to hire federal work-study students. So going back to the loans, the federal loans that I mentioned earlier that anybody has access to, their first year you get access to $5,500. That goes up to $6,500 as a sophomore and $7,500 as a junior and senior. There could be a mixture of subsidized and unsubsidized loans depending on financial need based on the expected family contribution. Any guesses on what is better, subsidized or unsubsidized? Subsidized is better because the interest that loan accrues while you're in school is paid for by the federal government. So basically, subsidized loans do not begin accruing interest until you graduate or drop below part-time. Unsubsidized loans begin accruing interest the moment they disperse. However, both of these loans, subsidized and unsubsidized loans, do not have to be paid back until 6 months after you graduate or drop below part-time. So there is that 6-month grace period. And there's a lot of different repayment options and safety nets involved in those federal loans. The Parent Plus loan, currently the interest rate is 7.08% fixed, and the origination fee is 4.236%. So the origination fee is basically the fee for borrowing. So let's pretend you take out $100, obviously not based in reality, but math is hard. If you take out $100, the federal government will send 96-ish to the school, and you still owe 100. So that's what that origination fee means. And then private loans. So first of all, you definitely want to, if you're going down the route of loans, you definitely want to take advantage of those federal loans first. The interest rates are better than you'll find elsewhere. Right now, the interest rate is 4.53%. And those safety nets are important. And then the Parent Plus and private loans are after those are already utilized. It's a smart decision to go that route. Private loans are loans that are taken out under the student's name. They'll need a cosigner generally because students their age usually don't have good credit. So you want a cosigner who has awesome credit because the interest rate is based on the cosigner's credit. The cosigner does not have to be a parent. It could be, it does not have to be. It doesn't even have to be a family member. So private loans can be taken out at any individual lending institution, a bank, credit union, like UW Credit Union, Sallie Mae, Wells Fargo, whatever other bank you're interested in. We can't recommend one lender over another, but there is a tool called Fast Choice where you can compare and contrast different lenders' interest rates, but you'll see a wide range because, again, that interest rate is based on cosigner's credit. Excuse me. There's also a difference in grace period for private loans. So that would be a question that you should ask a lender too, is do students have to start paying it back while they're still in school? If so, after how long? Some grace periods are 6 months, some grace periods are 9 months after disbursement, meaning if they take it out in September, October, November, December, January, February, March, they'll have to start making payments March of that year. There are some private loans, though, that don't have them make payments until they graduate. So just some questions to ask around that. A little bit more about the Parent Plus loan. This is a loan for parents of dependent undergraduate students. We get a question a lot of, so let's say that you have divorced parents and one parent is your custodial parent, like we talked about. Can the other parent who's helping to support you, whose information is not on the FAFSA, can they take out a Parent Plus loan? And the answer is yes. The student does need a FAFSA on file for a parent to take out a Parent Plus loan. The annual loan limit, and just something to know about financial aid as a whole, that total, between all of your financial aid, loans, scholarships, grants, you legally cannot have more financial aid than the total cost of attendance. So remember that, because sometimes that means that if you get a financial aid offer and then later on you get scholarships, sometimes those grants or other institutional scholarships will be displaced with your external scholarships. So that's just something to note and remember and ask your financial aid institution how they handle that. Repayment for federal, for the Parent Plus loans do begin 60 days from when the loan is dispersed. There is a deferment option that is available when you apply. And there's similar safety nets around repayment as well for those federal loans. So let's say that you've used some savings, you got some scholarships, you got your financial aid offer that includes, your federal loans, you got some merit-based grants, scholarships, whatever, and there's still a gap that's left to pay. So what are some resources? I already talked about the Parent Plus loan, some private student loans, and actually something I want to point out about the Parent Plus loan, the Parent Plus loan would be a separate application. However, there are some institutions that automatically include a Parent Plus loan as part of the financial aid offer. So that's what I meant when earlier I said it's really important that you look critically and discern what that financial aid offer is saying, because know that some do include that Parent Plus loan, but that's a decision that you have to make of whether or not you want to pursue that. Private student loans, scholarships, employment, all the stuff that we already talked about. And then there are also some other financing options. The first is asking if your school has a payment plan available so that you don't have to do one lump sum in the fall and another lump sum in the spring. And then the rest, if you have questions about home equity loans, life insurance policy loans, pension plans, or 529 plans, my answer will be, that is a great question to ask a tax professional. Or that is a great question to ask a financial planner. That's outside of our realm of expertise, but know that these may be resources for you to learn more about. What questions do you have for me? Yeah.
So if you apply for the FAFSA tomorrow, and you put down 4 schools, son or daughter decides to go to a 5th school, can you add school codes after the fact?
The question was, if you fill out the FAFSA tomorrow and you add 4 school codes, but later on your student decides to apply to 1 extra school, can you add school codes later? And the answer is yes. You can go back in and access your FAFSA and add a school code and resubmit it. Great question. Yes. Good question. The question is, what happens if I have 2 students in college? Who does what does that look like? So a reminder that in the FAFSA, I should probably go back here, huh? Is it echoing? It requests student information. The FAFSA is owned by the student. So it requires student information and then additionally parent information. So just a side note, this would be a really great opportunity to sit down next to each other and do this on your own and encourage your students to do the student portion on their own. I'm no fool. I know that a lot of parents fill it out for their students and then fill out their own information as well. But I encourage you to have the students fill out their own portion. A lot of folks, if you're a parent and you fill it out for your student, there's a lot of mistakes that happen that way because then you accidentally answer for yourself. But anyway, going back to your question of how do you handle that, each student will have their own FSA ID because they own that FAFSA, and then you will have one FSA ID and you can go in and add your information for both students. Next question? Yeah. Can you say that again?
Once you hit submit, how soon do you hear back?
Oh, so the question is, once you hit submit for the FAFSA, how soon do you hear back about your expected family contribution? Right away. So something that I didn't mention was every institution has a net price calculator. So once you know your expected family contribution, you can go into different institutions and type that in to the net price calculator and have an estimate of what your financial aid offer will be. Again, it's an estimate, but it should be relatively close to give you a sense. Obviously, that doesn't include merit, though. Yeah?
The U of W Madison gift aid for transfer students,
Yeah.
is that financially aid based as well?
Yeah, that's all need-based. There's one caveat to that, We do, part of the Badger promise, the transfer promise from two-year institutions in Wisconsin and some of the ones that were listed up there, if you transfer into UW-Madison and you don't have financial need, we still give you 1 year tuition and fees covered. So that's the one caveat. Everything else is based on financial need. Yeah. He's a first-generation college student. The question was, there was she's a student who has already graduated, is the other student who's just entering a first-generation college student. As long as you and their dad, if that's the situation, have not gotten a 4-year degree, then they're first-generation. Yep. Any other questions? And again, I'll be sticking around too, so if you have more individual questions, I'll be here. Anything for the good of the group? It's kind of hard to see you. All right. Thank you again for spending your evening learning about the FAFSA. Good luck. Have a great night. Thank you.